This is part 2 of the Hidden Bed Desk how to build video series. This is the second video of probably 4, and then the final video where I put everything together. So if you don't know much about this bed, or if you just found me by Googling or something like that, there's something you need to know about this bed. This bed is not special. What I mean by that is there's no specialized hardware that you need to buy for this bed. You want to build this bed, you can go to your local hardware store and building supplier and lumber supplier and get it. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world, whether you're in New York City or you're in Stockholm or maybe you're in Langhorne Creek, who knows? Wherever you are, you're going to be able to find the materials for this bed. I'm at about 450 Canadian pesos at this point. One of the reasons for that is that my finished plywood, my finished grade plywood, was a little bit more expensive than I'm used to paying. Again, I'm in a really remote area. I'm able to find the materials. You'll be able to find the materials. So here we go. Pitter patter. Let's get splattered.
This part of the sequence is basically all cuts. So I'm going to start with the sheet of plywood that goes under the mattress. You need to do 2 pieces for this part, and also there's part for the desk under here as well. I'm also taking this straight edge off, using the factory edge of this piece of plywood. That'll come in very handy later on in the build. Here I'm marking out the panels for the outside of the bed, and here I am using the straight edge to not only mark the line, but I'll also use the straight edge to make sure that the cuts are straight and true. And of course, having a sharp pencil is really, really important. Now, lining up the skill saw with the mark and then setting off the straight line to the right distance makes it so that this line is very, very straight. One thing I will note is that this board is upside down. So you want to cut with the good side facing down. And this is mostly important when you're cutting across the grain, as I am here. Now, if you cut across the grain, you're much more likely to get tear out in the plywood. So you can see the tear out here. It's basically just a rough edge, and sometimes it can get really bad. But to avoid that, if you turn the board over when you're using a skill saw, it really, really mitigates that. If you also score a line like this is one way to get around it. It doesn't work as well, but as long as your blade is on the other side of the line, the tear out will stop at the line. Now you can see on one side, it's very coarse, and on the other side, it's very smooth. So you have to be careful which way you do it. Now what I'm doing here is I'm just tracing out the side supports for the desk. I'm using the template that I made earlier on in the previous video, basically just setting it up in the right spot and then tracing it out and getting it ready to cut. Now there are going to be a number of ways that I'm going to cut this out, because there are straight cuts and there are curved cuts. For the straight cuts, I'm going to use my skill saw, and for the curved cuts, I'm going to use a jigsaw. You have to be really careful with these boards. Just because they say they're 4x8 and they're square, don't assume that. This sheet was actually out of square by 1/8 of an inch. So here I am again using that straight edge to get a nice straight line on this cut. It really helps to make sure that you do get that straight line. I actually found it easier to use the skill saw than the table saw for a lot of these cuts. Finishing off corner cuts with a jigsaw really helps to avoid overcut. You really don't want to overcut because it's going to make everything look really, really ugly. So have your jigsaw handy. I was able to do most of the cuts in this entire video using a jigsaw and the skill saw. In fact, I did use a router, but you could get away with only using the jigsaw and the skill saw. Now when I'm cutting out the part here, I'm staying about a 1/2 inch to 1/4 of an inch away from the line that I drew, so that I can come up and clean that up a little bit later after everything's cut out. When I'm using the skill saw to do the straight cuts, again I'm using that straight edge, and then here we are again using the jigsaw, again getting just like about 1/4 of an inch away from that line to make the following process just a tiny bit easier. Now when you have a cut that's on the inside and you need to get your skill saw in there, you can do what's called a plunge cut. This is a bit more dangerous. I'd call this like an advanced skill to use with the skill saw. It takes a little bit of practice, but if you're able to do this, you know, you should be fine. if you're not comfortable with this, you can always cut it the other way around, or if you're really, really careful, you could use a jigsaw. So now I've got those two pieces and I'm ready to move on to the next step. I'm going to cut out the desk supports now. And again, same thing. I'm going to use the jigsaw, but I'm going to cut about, you know, 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch, 1/8 of an inch away from the line to make the next step a little bit easier. Here I am again using the template. I'm placing the support on top of that template, and I'm using a flush cut trim bit to just make sure that this comes out just perfectly. So I'm going to have exact copies from each other by using the template as a guide. Doing the same thing with the desk support. So I found, because I am doing this on the back side, I found if I tape the desk supports, or the templates down to the desk supports, it made it easier to make sure that everything was lined up when I did turn it over and clamp everything down to get it ready to cut. Using the same process, I'm going to use a flush cut trim bit, and I'm going to follow along the edges. And by cutting away by 1/4 of an inch away from that line, it means that there's a lot less material for the router to take away. The router doesn't have to do as much work, and it's a lot easier. Again, for the corners, I just come in with a jigsaw just to make sure that those corners are nice, crisp, 90 degrees. Here we go. I have two identical pieces. Now for the next part, what I'm doing here is I'm taking out the 2x2 lumber and I'm offsetting it from the edge so that I know where to cut my dado, and then I'm offsetting that line by the thickness of the plywood that's going to be supporting the mattress. You can do this step with a skill saw. It takes a little bit more time, and you basically just have to, you know, cut out a groove, offset the blade, cut another line, and then you have to work the saw in there, you know, back and forth 3 or 4 times. So it can be done. If you don't have a router, you can definitely do this without it. So you can basically do the whole build with just the skill saw and the jigsaw, and you're gonna have to do a little bit of chiseling afterwards. So that concludes part 2. In the next video, there's gonna be a couple more cuts, but then mostly it's gonna be the assembly video. So if you want to keep up to date with the videos as they're coming out, make sure to subscribe, and you'll see these videos as soon as they're done. And then once everything's done, I will put a final video together showing the entire process from beginning to end.